Understanding the automation black box. I think this is key to unlocking the future of radiation oncology. Some disclosures. I am a co-founder, officer, and employee of Radformation Incorporated. So about me, I'm an ABR certified medical physicist. I love programming. I co-founded Radformation because I loved working on software to automate tasks, and essentially what happened here, you work on the original task, then you decide, okay, I should write a program to automate it. You're writing code, and you imagine that it'll take over and you'll have a lot more free time, but in reality you end up sort of took over my career. I don't have time for the original task anymore, working as a clinical physicist. I've been working on these automation solutions now full-time for about 5 years now. Some objectives. Motivation for automation. So significant improvements to radiation therapy will require adoption of automation because the workload required to implement these new approaches is going to go way up, in my opinion. Development and implementation of automation solutions. How does a clinical physicist participate? This is something I really want to focus on because, this is AAPM Spring Clinical. It's not likely that a lot of you are going to be writing your own programs and things. Some of you may be getting into deep learning and whatnot, and that's awesome. But fundamentally, you have a lot of influence in your clinic as far as doing things in a more efficient, higher quality, higher safety kind of approach. And so you are a key player in the implementation of some of these solutions. We will explore artificial intelligence and medical physics. And then an example of task automation with AI, AutoContour for automatic segmentation. So AutoContour is a product that Radformation developed, and we're going to go deep into what we were thinking about and how we approach this particular automation task. But thinking in particular beyond task automation, how do we think big picture so that this solution is going to actually be helpful, actually decrease the time it takes to do it and make it higher quality results in less time. Motivation. Automation has the potential to perform tasks in less time, reduce errors, and increase quality and consistency. Of course, reaching that potential depends on the implementation. If we automate parking cars, the implementation of just throwing it into this bin, it's not going to be particularly helpful. So, increasing population with cancer means a higher workload projected. Making adaptive planning feasible, much higher workload there. More SRS and SBRT or single fraction MET treatments are on the horizon, I believe. I believe that this is going to mean a lot more physics and dosimetry resources. So all of this means treatment plans, double checks, chart checks, etc. are increasing, the complexities increasing. So let's discuss adaptive planning. There's been a major push for adaptive planning with the MR-Linacs from Electa and ViewRay, and as well as a high-quality CBCT from Varian with the Ethos planning system. If you take this into account, can you enable dose escalation? Of course, if you are adapting, even if you're doing it in an offline way, which I think is very helpful, especially head and neck where you have size changes and so forth, very important, I think, to adapt. But you're talking about 2 to 5 times more treatment planning resources per patient. That's just my guess about how much more it would take. But if you're adapting every week, for example, maybe that's about 5 times as many times, right? You have to do 5 plans. More studies are necessary, of course, to determine the benefits of adaptive planning. But here's kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? We need to enable easier adoption of adaptive planning in order to do more studies so we actually know, is it helpful? So automation, I think, is the key to getting widespread adoption of adaptive planning and then actually getting some more data. I'm not going to get into this detail too much, but in 2019, conventional palliative treatments versus one single fraction SBRT. Basically, SBRT is better in practically every way with no differences in treatment-related toxic effects based on this result. So, it's far less trouble for the patient, but of course, the physics resources, 10 times less time at the Linac because you have one fraction instead of 10, but now you're doing an SBRT case, more complex, more physics and dosimetry resources. So the bottleneck is now physics and dosimetry to treat all these cases. Another thing to think about, there's many studies underway for oligometastatic disease. So this Sabre Comet group, where they're trying to compare standard palliative care versus these SBRT ablative radiotherapy. So this phase 2 randomized controlled trial of patients with 1 to 5 oligometastases of any histology, they compared standard of care palliative treatments with or without stereotactic body radiation therapy, SBRT, to all metastases, and basically found an increase in median overall survival from 28 to 41 months with ablative treatment. There's a great article on this, practical considerations for the implementation of a stereotactic body radiation therapy program for oligometastases. So again, something we don't have tons of evidence for, but I think it's clear that going forward, there's something there that we really need to dive into more. But like I said, can you do this without automation? Can your clinic suddenly start treating 1 to 5 SBRT plans for these patients that have these metastases instead of the simple palliative 300 times 10? We're going to need something to help achieve this. Another thing I want to talk about, something I feel passionate about, is I've learned about the history of protocols and cancer research. Pediatric cancer really blows me away as far as what they were able to achieve. It's with the groups that were trying to do research and develop cancer treatments. From the 1950s to today, survival for pediatric cancer went from about 10% to about 80%. And today, this is what really blows my mind, 50 to 60% of eligible children with cancer are enrolled in clinical trials. So my experience with trying to participate in a clinical trial when I was in the clinic, I remember one that we did, and I was literally writing things down on a piece of paper, and we were faxing it, and I was just blown away, like, there has to be a better way. And the data submission process, there's so much that I think that could be done on this front, where if automation if we were able to collaborate to develop these automation tools specifically for clinical trials, I'm excited by what could happen as far as clinical trial participation. If we get 50 to 60% of adults with cancer on clinical trials, you better believe, I just can't imagine how we couldn't make huge progress in a rapid manner in radiation therapy, getting better treatments faster, and with better data for clinicians to make decisions with the patients. One of the problems with medicine in general is that data is siloed. There's these databases. Everyone has their own database, and they have outcomes information, right? You have the DVH information of what was treated, and but nobody has access to it. Nobody really can take that and learn from it. And so there's so much opportunity here. And automation, I think, is key to unlocking this. Radiation is highly stochastic in nature, so that's just one reason why evidence-based medicine is really the only way to do it. You can't just look at one person and say, I know that this treatment is going to work for you, or it's not. It's all probabilities. You have this probability of local control, you have this probability of recurrence, you have this probability of metastases. So imagine if we did all collaborate to standardize things, to build to participate in clinical trials. We could achieve better normal tissue complication probabilities data, tumor control probability data, that would make it much easier to make decisions with, and even involve the patient, possibly dose escalation with trade-off versus normal tissue complications. Another thing that I think is going to become more and more important is retreatment. More data about retreatments. That would be super helpful. I know I was always nervous whenever we had to treat something near a previously treated site. Do we really know this is going to be safe? Obviously, faster development of new approaches, better outcomes or efficiency, and of course, better standardization and tools that make implementation of the best protocols easier. I think all of this again is motivation for why automation, I think, is the future of radiation therapy. We need to build these tools and these workflows and the standardization that will make it possible for as many people to participate in the highest level of care possible and as efficiently as possible. Another benefit I want to throw out there, faster time to first treatment. I think it's clear there's a psychological benefit. Just imagine yourself in the shoes of the patient. I want to treat this cancer as soon as possible. I want it taken care of. There's an intuitive benefit here where it seems as though if you treat it faster, there's a less probability that it's going to progress to metastatic disease. There's not been a ton of studies on this as far as delay to treatment. But obviously, if your stage changes, then your probability of survival goes down, right? So if your stage goes up, So I suppose that in a way it's kind of embedded in the ways cancer is staged and the evidence there, but there is evidence-based benefit here. There's a large review of data where they found even a 4-week delay of cancer treatment is associated with increased mortality across surgical, systemic treatment, and radiotherapy indications for 7 cancers. And another set of data, which was came out in 2018 for head and neck cancers, post-surgery treatment. So they found delays greater than 42 days after surgery should be avoided for best patient outcomes. They found in particular a delay of over 50 days would significantly decrease survival. And what's sad is that in this study, 42% of the cases had the delay that long. So if we could collapse that time from when the radiation oncologist consults the patient to the time of first treatment down to 1 day, I think that it would significantly decrease the probability that patients would receive subpar care for head and neck cancers and others. And head and neck is one of the treatments that is most challenging to implement, right? To make a good treatment plan. And so I think even just if we can make the planning time shorter, the probability that it's going to get over 50 days delayed from their surgery is smaller. So what about jobs? Let's tackle this. This is a sticky issue, obviously. So I just described the future of radiation oncology. Fundamentally, you see there's, I think, a major increase of workload on the horizon if we are going to make progress in increasing the standard of care, to improving the quality of care. The question is, does this workload balance? Does this increase in workload and the increase in automation efficiency, does it balance out? There's no simple answer, I'm afraid. But honestly, I think it's going to be a very long time before you could automate everything away. I think everything here, every tool that's available and will be probably for the next several years, will still require human in the loop. I would be very wary of any solution that says they're always going to do it right 100% of the time, especially AI. AI is kind of stochastic in nature too, right? It all depends on what it was trained on, and if you give it something it's never seen before, it's just rolling the dice, and there's hopefully a high probability that it will do a good job, but no guarantee. And so a human in the loop is this is kind of the key, is can we create a solution where your expertise, the impact of your expertise is maximized? How do we design solutions where you are not wasting your time doing little checklists and things that a computer is better at, honestly, and have your expertise be in the critical place where you have the biggest impact, and also to protect the patient, which is obviously key to medical physics. Here's a tough question. Can the incentives be aligned with maximum quality and efficiency? I don't know. It seems like the new RO model, radiation oncology model that CMS is pushing, that's kind of been delayed a bunch, but I think it might move us more towards this direction with the bundled payments of at least maximized efficiency. Can we incentivize maximum quality? That's a little trickier. I'd like to think that we'll get there, though, that it will pay to do the best possible treatments with the highest efficiency. And that's very difficult, I think, to design the payment models and stuff to do that. But I hope that it moves in that direction. So as a personal thing, I hope that you consider, how do I maximize the value of my services? I think people who are problem solvers, and in particular people who will try to think of better ways to do things and actually try to go out of their way to always be improving the processes. And you have tons of value if you're that kind of person. So developing those skills, I think, is important. Adaptability, being able to adapt to whatever the situations, how things change, is very important. So recommended reading. So this is a great article. It's published fairly recently. The Changing World of Radiation Oncology, Professionals in a World of AI, Just Jobs Lost, or a Solution to the Underprovision of Radiotherapy. I tend to think, that we're currently underproviding radiotherapy services as far as what we should be capable of in this day and age. But again, it's going to be interesting how it pans out. I don't have the exact answer, but I tend to think that it's going to remain fairly balanced. That automation is going to meet the needs of increased workload, and I hope that people don't lose jobs over it, and I hope that the patients benefit from an increased quality of care and increased safety that comes along with it. So that's my optimistic forecast. So the development and implementation of automation solutions. How does a clinical medical physicist participate in the process? First, I just want to say, you have the power. Masters of the Universe throwback. Anyway, you are, if not you, then who, right? A medical physicist is sort of the advocate of technology in the clinic, the advocate and also the devil's advocate. So you're the one who comes and says, this is what the technology can do. I also vet the technology. I'm the one who says this technology is working as intended and is safe for the patient. There's really nobody in the clinic, I think, that has the broad knowledge necessary to take a look at the workflow that you have and to be able to think about, okay, how can we make this more efficient? How do we design solutions to problems? And so there's a lot of ways you can participate as a medical physicist. I'm going to discuss kind of sort of the process of automation generally. First, you have to understand the process to be automated. So as a physicist, if you want to help in the billing department, if you want to help automate, how do you take your workflow where you're performing services and you're adding codes that you're billing, right? Then and also the physicians, right? How do you do it in a way where it's least likely to have billing errors, right? So if you don't know that whole process, if you don't understand the process and what your billing experts in your department are doing, it's very difficult to implement the solution. If you don't understand what your dosimetrists are doing, it's very difficult to implement something that will help them. Obviously, you need to understand the entire process to be automated, then advocate for a solution. Plan a solution and then advocate for one. Is there a commercial solution, or can you do something in-house? There are pros and cons to each of those. And then, of course, when you've come to the solution, you got to validate the solution. So commissioning, very important to have a tight feedback loop with the users. Are they using the solution? Is there problems? Is there things they don't like about it? Is there something you can improve? If you aren't doing this, in continuous quality improvement, that's sort of part of that. If you aren't doing this, then you aren't getting the benefit out of it, right? So let's kind of go through the black box a little bit more. So automation is really a logic puzzle. So first, we really have to understand the task fully. Identify a task and understand it fully. Identify the available tools. So if do you have all the pieces you need of the puzzle? You just have to order them in the right order and document them so everyone knows how to use them. Or is there missing pieces that you might need to build yourself? That becomes tricky, that we can talk about scripting a little bit, but you're going to need to understand what's available to you. A lot of automation is more of just reorganizing the process and how the order that things happen. Then, of course, implement the solution. This is usually iterative. So you try your best to do a solution that you think is working, and then you throw it out there, you test it, you try it, and get feedback, and maybe improve on it. So identifying the task. Let's see what makes a great task or a candidate for automation. So first, I think software related. I'm kind of biased because I love programming, but software is there's no capital expense practically if you have a computer, right? It's something that it's scalable usually. Anyway, the next thing, flowchartable. If it's repetitive or with clear rules, that is a great candidate for automation. So this example here is passing the salt and a system to pass arbitrary condiments. Not a great system, even if it will save time in the long run. Maybe not a great candidate for automation. Is it worth your time to automate it, right? So automation is an investment where you spend extra time or money or something upfront, effort, right, in order to avoid that time and effort and money going forward, hopefully in perpetuity if it's a good automation candidate. So, here's a graph, right? How much time you shave off each time you do a task versus how long can you work on something, making something more efficient before you're spending more time than you save across 5 years, right? So it's an interesting graph. I don't know if you actually will ever use it, but the other question is, does it improve your quality of life, right? A lot of tasks that you do, keeping the staff happy is obviously extremely important. So if they are doing tedious things that make them not enjoy their job, that really there's no reason that they should be doing. If you can somehow take that off their plate, then they can be doing things that they find more interesting and perhaps more impactful to the patient, hopefully. This one I think is extremely important to consider. Is a solution already supported in a product you already have, but you just have to configure it? Because this is a very low-hanging fruit, right? So opportunities abound, big and small. So identifying the available tools, let's think about this a little more deeply. So get the most out of the products you have. RTFN stands for Read the Freaking Manual. I think at least skim. Again, if not you, then who, right? Are the physicians going to be reading the manual of this technology? Is the at least are they going to they'll sit down and familiarize themselves with all the features? The dosimetrist, maybe, might be a good candidate to like explore what you can be done. The therapist, probably not, right? So if not you, the physicist, then who is going to take a think and try to figure out what do these products really offer and how can we use them effectively to make the biggest impact on patient care. You can call the support desk, reach out to them for whatever vendors you have. Can this product do something that I want it to do? And if not, that's great feedback for them, And vendors, I know as a vendor that it's extremely helpful when we get feedback from customers that, if we did this, it might be better. And, everyone benefits. Everybody who has that product benefits when the vendor responds to that feedback and tries to add features as appropriate. Vendor-sponsored training and webinars are helpful. Of course, there's also scripting application programming interfaces, APIs. These are extremely powerful, but there's possible limitations that require workarounds. But the tight integration is really powerful. Let's just do a real tiny example because opportunities are everywhere. So the task of saving an IMRTQA report and importing it into an R&V system. So let's say currently in your system, you have to browse through 5 folders. Every time you go to import, you click the button to import, and you have to go double-click through a bunch of folders and get there. So think about that. I mean, it's not a big deal, right? But you're doing this hundreds of times a year, and if you could just make it so you don't have to browse through those 5 folders, maybe that would help. Or maybe there's another way you can. Maybe you can just save the default save location. You can change the default save location on the IMRTQA program, or maybe you could even set the R&V document import location to the IMRTQA save location. Of course, you have to watch out for side effects, right? And this is key because if you're like, oh well, this will make it easier if I just change this, but maybe the therapist was using it to import some documents or something, and suddenly it's in the wrong place for them, right? So anyway, there's potential workarounds that you could use. A bigger example, and more relevant to the task at hand with auto contour and automatic segmentation. So the task is inserting treatment site specific TG263 compliant structures into a new structure set. So what tools are available and what's the implementation? So does your TPS let you create structure set templates? Can you implement templates that meet your department's needs? Can you get department buy-in? This can be a major challenge. We'll get into this a little bit more in a little bit here, but can you get everyone to agree that we're going to move all our structure set templates going forward? Every plan what we do, we're going to use these structure set templates. These are the IDs for the structures that we're going to use, and everyone's on the same page. That's a challenge, and that is, I think, one of the key challenges. So another idea, do you have any available auto segmentation tools and templates that you can configure? No plug there, obviously. Combine it with plan templates, perhaps. You think big picture. Can you use plan templates to automatically add setup fields and initial temp fields for specific plans? So there's things that are in your treatment planning system probably right now that you may or may not be taking full advantage of. Scripting, it's normal power and flexibility, but a much higher barrier to entry. I'm going to leave these in here mostly for people who are interested in looking more deeply into this, but it's something that is very powerful and you can really get a lot done, and you can customize. And perhaps the greatest advantage to doing it yourself is that you can customize the script very specifically to your clinic. So if none of the commercial products out there are meeting the needs of your specific clinic, the specific needs of your clinic, having some in-house tools that you develop might be the solution. Of course, there are some pitfalls. Verification, validation, how can you be sure that it works correctly and meets the end user's needs? And in particular, long-term support can be a problem. So if the developer leaves, obviously it would be important to spend time and resources to document everything with the tools that they've been built. Will a tool break when software versions change? The answer is probably yes, based on our experience. But so who's going to go in and fix those? And adding new protocols if things need to change with the new times, new approaches of treatment. Those are the big downfalls, but like I said, there is a major benefit to doing it yourself in that you can really customize it to your clinic. Advocating for a solution. So buy-in from the department is really one of the biggest barriers to entry for automation. So my suggestion here is to involve stakeholders in the solution planning and implementation. Think of all the end users, right? Who's going to be impacted by this? And get their input and their feedback. It's invaluable. The doctors, the dosimetrists, the therapists, the front desk staff, whoever is involved in whatever change you're hoping to make based on your perception of what would be more efficient and safer or higher quality, they need to be involved so they have the opportunity to put their input in there and to feel like they are part of the solution too. It really is important. Demonstrate the benefit. Show instead of tell. If there's some way that you can make a prototype or make a little video or something that demonstrates exactly how this is going to be helpful, that's very powerful. Remember, adoption of automation is an investment, so it might be helpful to communicate this, that it's going to take some upfront cost and time and resources to set it up potentially, but there's going to be long-term gains in efficiency and quality. So I want to discuss Radformation's approach to automation solutions. So Radformation, we've been around about 5 years. And automation really is fundamental to our company's vision of we were medical physicists in the clinics, the co-founders of Radformation, who felt like we were doing things that could have been done better by software, and that it took time that we could have been using for more high impact tasks and improving quality and so forth of the treatment plans. And there's so much we could have done if we didn't have to do that. These tasks that we thought automation could address. So we've thought really hard about how do we build the best possible solutions, and here are kind of the main principles we go by, and I think they'll be useful to anybody who's trying to develop solutions like these. First, you need to get feedback early and often and iterate quickly. We had the benefit of since we're several of our developers are medical physicists, to have kind of a feedback loop on our own brains that helps us, I think, move quickly. But also to be, trying to work with the customer and really take what they have and iterate as quickly as possible whenever the feature requests come in that seem like they'll add value and are feasible and so forth. And obviously you don't affect the safety of our product. So another thing is to try to foresee necessary flexibility as much as possible. So it's clear from our experience, being in hundreds and hundreds of clinics, that everyone kind of has their own flavors of how they approach different things in radiation therapy. So how do you design it in a way where it's as customizable as possible to meet as many needs as possible? That's very difficult, but it's something that we take very seriously, and we try to build into the product as much as possible. This, I think, is key. Take a holistic view of the task. How does it plug into the bigger picture, right? When you're doing tasks, a lot of automatic segmentation, for example, solutions, they are just focused on we're going to hand you these contours, right? We're going to hand you these structures, and that's all we're doing. But if you kind of take the holistic view of the task, and I think we'll get into more of how we approach this specifically for AutoContour. Are there external inputs or tools that add value? So is there something that you can take from the workflow, the broader workflow, that benefits the task automation? Can you open up your vision from this, laser focused, I'm just doing this one task, to how does it fit into the big picture in a way that makes it as helpful and effective as possible? And in particular, how do you minimize friction? So handoffs and communication. How does the physician communicate what structures they want contoured for this plan, right? How does the dosimetrists communicate that I have reviewed all of these structures and I have approved them? Also, as far as scripting APIs go, can you build a solution that's integrated with your current workflow? So if you can make it an integrated script with the treatment planning system, for example, then you don't have to open up a whole nother application and then do an export and an import and so forth. So, all of these things should be something that people consider as they're designing these solutions. Finally, design for easy adoption. So make it as easy as possible to set up and easy to try. When I was in the clinic, you got a lot of different software solutions. I think it would have been fantastic to get a free trial to give it a try. It's understandable, though, that a lot of these software solutions are very large, and treatment planning systems, for example, it would be difficult to just download something and try it, right? But fundamentally, I think if it's possible, as much as possible, to make it easy to try it out and kind of get a sense for, is this going to be helpful for my clinic, is important. So we've really tried to do that. And responsive interface and results as fast as reasonably achievable. So can you design it to be responsive so that people get what they want as fast as possible? Very challenging in our space because there's large 3D matrices of data that we're operating on, and dose calculations, for example, are very computationally intensive. But these are key, I think, for making solutions that are going to actually have the impact and get people excited about them. All right, AI and radiation therapy. I want to kind of do a broad brush on this, but I would highly recommend reading this article, the 2020 Grand Challenges for Medical Physics and Radiation Oncology, Priorities for the Medical Physicists, right? So with AI, there are 4 priorities that they talk about, and they go into this in more detail. So like I said, I recommend reading it. The implementation and customization of AI technology, the development of AI technology. So these two, I think more than anything, I think this mostly falls on the vendors, the commercial space, which, there are medical physicists in Red Information. We have many medical physicists and who are in industry, and that's extremely important because the input of medical physicists into the commercial into industry is invaluable to make sure that the products actually meet the needs of the end users, the medical physicists and those in their department. And, there are, of course, some clinical medical physicists that may be actually trying to build their own AI technologies in-house, especially large academic centers. And that's fantastic. But, again, I think for the average clinical medical physicist, these two are perhaps the most applicable. Facilitating access to proper data. So how can you as a and we'll get into this more in detail, but how can you as a clinical medical physicist make it possible to take advantage of the treasure trove of data that your clinic has, because it is a treasure trove. And I think currently everything's siloed in a way where it's like we're all dragons hoarding our data, right? Just on a pile of treasure, and nobody else is going to benefit from it. But how can we get past that and really contribute to the advancement of radiation oncology as a field? That data, to unlock it, I think there's a lot of potential there. Education and training for AI skills. So understanding how these work, understanding their limitations, understanding how you should approach commissioning these type of products. These are all really important. So anyway, again, I recommend reading this. All right, let's get into AI-based contouring, just a high-level general overview of how they generally work. So most AI-based contouring solutions use convolutional neural networks. The goal is to take this image and to actually take each voxel, so you have a 3D image, and identify if it's in or out. Is it in the bladder or out of the bladder? Okay, so every structure could have its own model. Maybe you could even combine models. You could have multiple labels in a single model, right? Where it's like, this is a bladder and this box over here is a prostate and so forth. So there's obviously lots of ways you can approach this, but in general, the way convolutional neural networks work is that you have an input image. There's convolutions that are performed on that image that turn them into a set of feature maps. Each feature map is subsampled into other feature maps, and with more convolutions and subsampling, until finally the final analysis by all these neurons, right, produces the output of whatever the end goal is. It could be labeling. Is this image a robot, for example, right? But in our case, like I said, is this voxel inside or outside of a particular structure? So the most popular one, to my knowledge, for our particular application, radiation therapy segmentation of CT scans, is the UNet, which has a process of convolving and downsampling. So sort of have these different layers that process different breadths of the image. So you have one layer that's high resolution and taking these patches, these high resolution patches, and trying to do the analysis, other layers that are lower resolution. And the convolutions can maybe pull out different features, maybe edge detection in one type of convolution, or there's a lot of ways that the convolutions, and it's also difficult perhaps to explain, and this is one of the big challenges, exactly what it's doing. But when you train the model, ultimately the goal is that it has learned something about the data. Now, the way that we do this is supervised learning. So supervised learning is where we provide to this model that we've developed, this neural network, we provide images and labels and say this is what is actually the bladder in the scan, for example, and we have it try to learn on unseen data, right? A scan it's never seen before, to learn to classify those voxels as bladder or not bladder, right? And this really depends on the quality of your data, right? So if you don't have good data, your bladder contours are terrible, and you train a neural network to identify the bladder, it's not going to be very successful. What parameters can you tune in this kind of AI? So the three key things I want to focus on is pre-processing. So how do you normalize the data into something that the neural network can process, right? So what Hounsfield unit range should you use? What values from 0 to 1? How can you normalize it from 0 to 1, for example? Are you going to average things out before you throw it in there? Are you going to do some sort of edge detection before you throw it in? There's lots of things you could do. The CNN architecture itself, how many layers, how many neurons per layer, and so forth, and the post-processing, what are you going to do after it comes out? Are you going to smooth it, and so forth? So these are kind of the main things that you can iterate through. And as you train the models, of course, you're trying to decide, you're trying to use a metric. We use the DICE score as our main metric to indicate whether it's getting better, right? And you train the model until it's hopefully predicting whether a voxel is in or out on this data that's never seen before, that it wasn't trained on, right? So key to this process is your data pipeline. How do you get enough data to train and validate with? How do you ensure the data is correctly labeled? How do you add to your data efficiently? So those are really key. If you can't get your data pipeline to a point where data can efficiently be added, then it's going to really slow you down. All right, so let's talk about AutoContour, which is Radformation's approach to implementing this automatic segmentation. So AutoContour is an FDA 510K cleared AI contouring product. Our goals with AutoContour have been to have the data pipeline designed for continuous quality improvement. So how do we design that, like I said, where it will be easy for us to create new models, to validate the models, and to make those improved models or new models available? How do we efficiently and accurately segment the structures? One thing in our one goal that we have is to minimize noise. So how do we make it so we aren't throwing every single structure at you? As a clinician, as a physicist, I know that when you have a lot of extra structures that aren't actually clinically important, it's just kind of noise, like I said here. So if we can somehow use templates, and again, this is kind of the bigger picture idea, is there some way that we can plug into templates that focus on clinically relevant structures so that when the user runs AutoContour, they get exactly what they want out of it? Contouring safety. So how do we make it so it's as safe as possible, and we don't give results to the user that are incorrect, that ultimately affect the patient, because that error propagates into the treatment plan. So the way we implemented that is we have a required review and approval, but it's streamlined as much as possible. So we know that the user has to do this. There is no automatic segmentation solution that will guarantee 100% of the time accurate contours. It's just impossible. Okay, so we know that this is important, and so that we focused on, since we have to do this, how do we make it as streamlined as possible and as safe as possible? Another nice thing, we have another product, ClearCheck, that has these structure checks, like for stray pixels and is there slice gaps and other things. So ClearCheck and AutoContour together make a great solution. So because ClearCheck can be an independent check of the structures generated in AutoContour. And finally, the other goal is minimizing back and forth between systems. So suppose there is a problem in AutoContour, how do we make it so the user doesn't have to go back and forth with the treatment planning system to fix it? So editing, how do we make editing tools that are easy to use and helpful? And then image registration. So how can we sort of help it so you don't have to go back and forth with the treatment planning system in order to make sure that your MR and your CT the structure in your MR doesn't match or does not match the structure in your CT. So implementing those into the product, these are things that, again, when you think about automation, you need to minimize the handoffs, minimize the interfaces, as much as possible. Where you have to jump out of your system into another and back over. These are part of the goals that we thought were important in our implementation. So let's talk about the Radformation's auto contour data pipeline. I think this makes this product extremely unique. And I can't speak for other vendors, but this is how we do it. So how do you get enough? These are the questions I asked earlier. How do you get enough data to train on? We have a script to automatically anonymize and upload images and structure sets, so that clinics that are willing to share their data with a data use agreement can easily, within probably a half an hour of their time, just launch it and send it up to our secure storage in the cloud. So that's how we were able to train AutoContour. We were able to have some clinics make this data use agreements with us and send us this anonymized data. It was very easy for them to actually do it. We tried to streamline that for them, right? So we spent the resources to make the script, to anonymize it, and to send it to us. And that we also, with AutoContour, provide a script for users to send anonymized data to us on a small scale. So if there's a scan that's not working well on, they can just run the script and we get it with a message they can type in that says, oh, this is what happened. Can you take a look? If there's a structure we don't currently support, maybe they could send us 5 scans or something. We can get started on our end to build a model. How do you ensure the data is clean? So we built a specialized application that makes it possible to review and approve the contours in the uploaded data and tag them for inclusion in the training data set for specific structures. So this anonymized data has been uploaded. So if we have an application that can simply pop it open, so our team can view it, and our team can say, okay, these structures are good, these structures we don't want to include for whatever reason. That pipeline is extremely efficient to make the most of the structures, make the most of the data that was sent. How do you add to your data efficiently? So we also have a specialized application for editing and reviewing data so they can be added to the training data set. We also internally have dedicated resources, a full-time employee that is dedicated to augmenting the data. So we are adding to our data sets by contouring things that are not on the CT scans already. And again, we built a specialized application to make that process as streamlined as possible so that our internal resources are used to their full potential. So investing in this pipeline the way that we have really enables us to augment our current models, to improve them, as well as to add new models as needed, and to do so in a very efficient way. Again, getting clean data is really key to the success of AI models. And so spending extra resources as we have in trying to make that pipeline as efficient and effective as possible is really important. Okay, now let's talk about contouring and safety, because this is fundamentally important to the design of AutoContour. So Royals, the Q4 2017 aggregate report, said, contour errors are a high-risk part of the radiation oncology procedure, due partly to the limited amount of review they receive. As such, it is very important to try to minimize the occurrence of these errors through training, competency assessment, time management, software systems design, and standardized procedures, etc. Additionally, communication between the planner and the physician, including review and approval, are critical to the process. The radiation oncologist specifies the normal tissues requiring segmentation and is ultimately responsible for ensuring the accurate delineation of the OARs. In TG100, which is the application of risk analysis methods to radiation therapy quality management, the potential failure modes with the highest risk priority numbers, the number 1 and number 2 had to do with contouring, incorrect interpretation of tumor and normal tissue, and number 2 is wrong organ, wrong site, wrong expansions. In TG275, strategies for effective physics plan and chart review in radiation therapy, their highest RPN values, those steps, the number 1 spot was wrong or inaccurate MD contours. The number 7 spot was wrong or inaccurate dosimetrist contours. And the number 18 spot was missing MD or dosimetry contours. So a streamlined and effective review and approval process was fundamental to AutoContour's design. So with AutoContour, we have planning structure generation with templates. So we're no longer typing, hopefully, if you've configured it, you're no longer typing PTV margins manually. We have a required review of every slice. Fundamentally, there is no other way to know if the structure is correctly contoured. You can't look at a 3D view because it doesn't have the context of the two-dimensional image, the slice, the Hounsfield units, in a way that every slice is sure to be reviewed in its context. But we can streamline it as much as possible. So we put a lot of work into streamlining this process to make it as painless as possible while still reviewing it as fully as possible. And again, with ClearCheck, another product of ours, we have these structure checks that can be used as an independent check to just check for slice gaps or missing or stray pixels and so forth. So to do a quick demo of AutoContour, so you have an idea of how it's implemented and what it looks like in practice, here's Eclipse. If you don't have Eclipse, AutoContour does have a standalone DICOM interface that works fine. That has a templating engine where you can pick which structures to do and which structures to generate and so forth. But in Eclipse, we actually launch ClearCheck first. We've generated our structure set template. So ClearCheck is where that the physician or the treatment planner can set a constraint template for their plan and indicate what the goals are. Obviously, this should be what the physician is intending for this plan. So this is a great way to communicate exactly what this plan should look like as far as dose constraints goes. Now with AutoContour, in our AutoContour administration application, you can configure it so that it automatically can link that structure set, the ClearCheck constraint template with a AutoContour template, including structure generation, planning structure generation. So that's what's happening over here. So this is happening in real time. So this bar is indicating the processing of the AutoContour structures. You can see the rectum, the prostate, the femur, the small bowel, the bladder, they're all processing right now. And eventually, once they're done, it will enter the AutoContour state. Okay, so here you see we have editing tools. If you wanted to edit the body, for example, it might not let me if it's using a calculated plan. Oh, it isn't. So it keeps track of the state. It's really basically we tried to make it as easy as possible to modify things as needed. So you can see as soon as things are received, we can hit the review button, and it starts this automatic scrolling process. So you'll notice we try to group the review into logical groups. So here the rectum, the prostate, the bladder, all in one approval group so that you can review them in an automated way. As soon as you're satisfied with it, so assuming that you like these contours, you just hit the check button and it automatically goes to the next one. It tries to zoom out and goes to the top of the structure and starts the automatic scrolling process. So it really just in a matter of maybe a couple minutes, you can review all the structures that have been auto-contoured and decide what to do with them. Now, some people, for example, wouldn't like these femurs, how they're contoured all the way to the bottom here. So something you could do, for example, is you could select the left femur. We can clear the structure from this plane. Control D is the hotkey for that. We can clear the structure from the bottom plane. Control D, and then interpolate the edit. So recent edit interpolation, this is a really nice tool to interpolate brush edits or pencil edits across multiple slices. Again, we're trying to build tools that make it easy for you to fix things so that you don't have to go back and forth to a different workspace. So I'm going to do the same for this other femur. I'm going to do it to the bottom of this pubic, that's not the pubic symphysis, but the pubic bone. And then I'm going to interpolate those edits, and now of course we have the structure the way we want it. So we'll want to review the structures, approve them again. It's doing the body. After all the auto-contour structures are done, it will automatically go in and you can start approving the structures that came from the TPS, like the body. It's not a bad idea. You know, the body is a very important structure actually because it affects the dose calculation. Now let's talk about the structure generation. So these planning structures came from the template. So our ClearCheck constraint template linked to our auto contour structure generation template. So it knows what to generate. So all I have to do is hit this play button or generate structured button, and it'll generate all of these planning structures. So you have rectum overlap. We can review that one. So it's just where the rectum overlap the PTV. We can approve it. Let's do the PTV opt, which I think looks like, and you can do multiple steps. So it's really fantastic. So this one is a margin on the PTV with a little bit extra superior margin, plus a superior and inferior margin, plus a rectum crop out of the structure. So basically any type of operations that you would have done manually in Eclipse or in your treatment planning system to do Boolean operations or margins or crops, that sequence you can put into the template so that you can get what you want right away. Once you're done, you just hit the export button, and it will begin the export to the treatment planning system. In Eclipse, if you don't have the Eclipse version, it will be to a structure set DICOM file that will be able to be imported along with the CT data. All right, so it's got the new structures and the modified structures. It tells you what it's done. And here we are back in Eclipse with all the structures contoured. When it sends it back, it's in an unsaved state, so you can either save. If you wanted to revert back before auto contour had done anything, you can revert or reload all. When you run auto contour again, auto contour maintains a history of everything that it's done. So it remembers the auto contoured state, it remembers your approvals, and in fact, if somebody's made changes, you could come in here and revert it back to the old state that it was in. So I guess the original state that it was brought over from the TPS is empty, so there it is, empty. I can undo that. So again, trying to think about what the user might want to do with the structures that are generated. To show you the thorax results real quick, we'll just do a quick scroll through. So we have the trachea, esophagus, the lungs, the aorta, the superior vena cava, bronchus, heart. This is the liver, got the stomach, got the kidneys, and that's all for the thorax scan. So for the head and neck, I'll show you auto contours results. For this case, we got brain, we have the eyes, the lenses, lacrimal glands, optic nerves, brainstem, cochlea, and internal ear structures, mandible, oral cavity, parotid glands, spinal cord, and submandibular glands. So now let's consider again this idea of beyond task automation, thinking big picture. So the task here is contouring. The big picture is the radiation treatment planning workflow. So what additional inputs from the workflow increase effectiveness? Again, with AutoContour, we thought about plan-based templates to inform the planning structure generation. Then maximizing communication. Which structures are necessary for this plan? Again, with the template-based approach, we have this approach where we can make sure that all those structures that are necessary for the plan are present. Reducing interoperative friction, so integrating the solution where possible, using an API if possible. Empowering the user to have the highest impact possible with the highest efficiency. So we know the review is necessary in every case. How do we streamline it? Again, and how do we make it so that the user doesn't have to go back and forth between different workspaces? So to summarize, I believe significant improvements in radiation therapy will require automation because the workload is increased so much. Development and implementation of automation solutions. In that process, the clinical physicists play an extremely important role. You can identify tasks for automation, and in particular, you play a very important role in advocating for a solution and working with your department to make sure all the stakeholders are on board and that they understand how to do it and how to use the new solution. And finally, when it comes to automation, think big picture. Think about how is this going to actually fit in my workflow and the MD's workflow and the dosimetrist workflow, and how can I minimize the friction, maximize the communication, and so forth. These are the things to think about. That's all I have today. Thanks so much for attending.